Welcome to High Scary Stories. Tonight we descend into the forgotten corners of the world where time bends, memories rot, and silence watches from the shadows. 7 true encounters. 7 doors you should never open. A boy who never turns around. A cabin that waits for someone who'll never return. A ritual carved in stone that demands a price. Some say it's just the woods, just bad dreams. But you know better. This is High Scary Stories. Let's begin. Story 1. The Cabin That Waited. I was 27 when I found out about the cabin. It came in a yellowed envelope that had no return address and smelled faintly of cedar. Inside was a handwritten note from a lawyer I'd never heard of, and a small map drawn in ink that had bled in a few places from time or sweat. It said my grandfather had left me a piece of land out near the Arizona Plateau, somewhere between Winslow and the edge of nowhere. I hadn't seen my grandfather since I was a kid, and even then, he was more shadow than man, always watching from the back porch with a cigarette, and a silence that weighed more than words. The map had one spot circled in red, with 2 words written next to it. Cabin waits. I thought it was a joke, or maybe a mistake. I wasn't the type to inherit anything, and definitely not the type to drive 10 hours into the desert for it. But something about the way the ink had soaked into the page made it feel deliberate, like it was meant for me to find, not just delivered. I didn't believe in signs, but I packed my bag anyway. Just one weekend, I told myself, just to see. The road vanished long before the map said it would. Asphalt turned to gravel, and gravel gave way to sun-baked dirt lined with brittle shrubs and the occasional saguaro casting tall, distorted shadows. By late afternoon, the GPS on my phone had given up entirely, and the sun hung low behind the distant mesas, painting the sky in bruised purples and rust-red streaks. I parked where the trail became too narrow for the car and walked the rest of the way, with the sound of my boots crunching dry earth and the only thing keeping me company. The air was dry and sharp, of the kind that settles in your throat like dust and never leaves. I came over a low ridge expecting to see ruins or a shack at most. But the cabin stood upright, tucked into a bend of red stone cliffs like it had been grown from the desert itself. It was small, only 1 story with walls the color of old parchment, and a roof covered in sun-bleached metal sheets that clicked softly in the wind. There were no power lines, no mailbox, no sign of human life. Yet the door hung slightly ajar, and a single footprint fresh in the dirt led straight to it. My own foot froze mid-step. I hadn't passed anyone on the road. There shouldn't have been anyone else out here. I stepped carefully toward the cabin, my pulse ticking louder with each crunch of gravel. The footprint wasn't mine, that much was clear. It was narrower, longer, almost delicate, like someone had walked barefoot across the desert floor without hesitation. I nudged the door open, expecting dust and silence. But what greeted me was the scent of dry wood, and something older, something metallic. Inside the cabin was surprisingly intact. A table with 2 chairs, a cast iron stove in the corner, and a single cot pressed against the far wall. No electricity, no running water, just stillness. But what made me pause wasn't the layout, it was the journal resting in the middle of the table. Bound in cracked leather, the cover had no title, but my name was written on a torn scrap tucked between its pages. Not my grandfather's name, not my father's. Mine. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. I hadn't even decided for sure until the night before. My hands felt stiff as I flipped it open. The first page was blank. The second had a sentence written in small, careful print. You've already been here. My breath caught as a gust of wind slammed the door shut behind me, sealing the silence tight. When I looked back, The footprint outside was gone. I stood still for a long moment, listening to the silence press in around me. The cabin felt heavier now, like the air had thickened just enough to make every breath slightly more effort than it should have been. I closed the journal and slipped it into my bag, more out of instinct than intent, then turned my attention to the rest of the space. Against the back wall was a trap door I hadn't noticed before, mostly covered by a woven rug whose colors had faded to muted reds and browns. There was no handle, just a small iron ring flush with the wood. I crouched beside it and ran my fingers along the edge. It wasn't dusty. No cobwebs, no grit, no resistance when I pulled it open. The hinges let out a tired groan as the square door lifted, revealing a narrow set of wooden steps descending into darkness. I hesitated, flashlight in hand, and began to climb down slowly, one step at a time. The air changed, almost immediately cooler and damp, like the earth itself had been holding its breath for years. At the bottom, I found a cellar maybe 10 feet square, lined with shelves that held rusted cans, old tools, and glass jars full of murky liquid. In the center of the floor was a crate covered in canvas and wrapped tightly in copper wire. The wire had turned green in spots, oxidized from age, but the pattern was too precise, too deliberate. As I stepped closer, my flashlight flickered once, then again, then went out completely. In the pitch black, I heard something shift, a faint rustle, not from above, not from behind, but from inside the crate. I stood frozen, the flashlight useless in my hand, as the sound from inside the crate grew more distinct, like something heavy, brushing against wood, then settling again. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened. My heart beat so loud, it drowned out the silence. Then, without warning, the copper wire snapped. Not all at once, but strand by strand, each one giving way with a dry metallic pop until the canvas sagged open just enough to expose what lay beneath. My eyes adjusted slowly to the dim, ambient light seeping through the floorboards above, and I could make out the outline of a figure, not a skeleton, not bones, but a body preserved too well skinned, drawn tight over features that didn't quite make sense. The head was tilted back, mouth slightly open, as if in mid-sentence, and the eyes were closed, yet I had the unmistakable feeling they were aware. The cloth wrapped around the body had symbols etched into it, crude geometric patterns scorched into the fabric. I stumbled back and bumped into a shelf, sending a jar crashing to the ground. Its contents splattered, and the smell hit instantly, sweet and rotting like overripe fruit soaked in blood. That was when the eyes opened. Not fast, not dramatic, just a slow flutter, like waking from a long sleep. They were the wrong color, a pale, washed-out yellow that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. I backed toward the stairs, heart clawing its way into my throat, but the air had changed again, thicker, heavier, like the walls were pushing in. And from the thing in the crate came a sound low and wet, like a breath being drawn after centuries of silence. I turned and scrambled up the stairs 2 at a time, nearly tripping in the dark, my hands fumbling for the trapdoor above. The cabin groaned as I shoved it open and crawled out into the stale desert light that filtered through the warped windows. I didn't stop to look back. I slammed the trapdoor shut, dragged the heavy rug over it, and stumbled outside into the heat, like I had been drowning underground, and finally breached the surface. The sky had shifted somehow, the color deeper, more bruised, as if the sun had retreated slightly and left the world off balance. My car sat exactly where I left it, but when I reached for the door, the handle was coated in dust again, like it had been sitting untouched for years. I wiped it clean and got in, trying to start the engine. Nothing. Just a single click in silence. I tried again. The same. I gripped the steering wheel and looked at the cabin. The front door was closed now, No sign it had ever been ajar, and yet I knew I hadn't touched it. Then I saw something new. Another footprint beside mine, only it wasn't shaped like any foot I'd ever seen. Too long. Toes curved inward like claws. As the wind kicked up dust across the plateau, I could swear I heard it again from beneath the cabin, that low-drawn breath, like something remembering how to breathe. I left the car and walked. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just knew I couldn't be near that cabin any longer. The sun sank fast behind the cliffs, and by the time darkness took the plateau, I was still moving, feet blistered and throat dry, guided only by the thin silver of moonlight. I found an old ranger station 2 miles out, abandoned but intact. The door was locked, but a rock changed that. I stayed the night there, barely slept, listening for every shift in the wind, every scrape of branch against wood. At dawn, I hiked back to the road, hoping to flag someone down. A truck finally stopped around noon. The man driving didn't ask questions when I climbed in. Just glanced at me once and said, "You came from the cabin, didn't you?" I asked him what he meant, but he didn't answer. Only said, "You shouldn't have opened it. No one's supposed to open it." I tried to laugh it off, but he wasn't smiling. Back home, things felt off. My apartment was colder. My mirrors caught reflections that weren't mind shapes that didn't match. Then last night a knock came at the door. When I opened it, no one was there. Just a single footprint in the hallway. Long, narrow toes curled inward, waiting. Story 2. No name on the stone. I never planned to visit the cemetery. It just happened one evening when I took a wrong turn outside a small coastal town in Maine. I'd been driving alone for hours, following the shoreline with no real destination in mind, hoping that the quiet might help clear my head. The sun was setting fast, and the fog rolled in thicker than I expected, swallowing the road and turning every tree into a shadow. That was when I saw the sign barely hanging from one rusted chain. Ridge Hollow Cemetery. The letters were faded, but something about the name made me stop. I pulled over without thinking of headlights cutting across a field of crooked stones, barely visible through the mist. There was no gate, no fence, just a path that disappeared between the graves. I got out of the car and walked a few steps forward, gravel crunching underfoot. The air felt still heavier than it should have been. I told myself I was just curious, that it was just a place like any other. But I could feel it already somewhere deep in my chest. This was not a place people wandered into. This was a place that waited for someone to come back, even if they didn't know they had been there before. The path wound gently between leaning headstones, some barely more than jagged rocks with time-worn initials. The fog clung low to the ground, swirling around my ankles like it was trying to pull me further in. I walked slowly each step, feeling like I was crossing some invisible threshold. The trees lining the edges of the cemetery stood perfectly still, their branches unmoving, even though I felt a faint breeze on my face. A few plastic flowers littered the ground, faded and stiff with age, their colors leached into shades of gray. The further I went, the quieter it became. Not peaceful quiet, but hollow-like sound itself had been stripped away. I came to a small rise near the back, where the trees closed in tighter, forming a kind of arch. There was a clearing behind it, maybe 10 feet wide, and in the center stood a single stone. It was taller than the rest, smooth and unmarked. No name, no date, nothing but a surface that looked almost too clean, too deliberate. I approached it slowly, chest tightening with every step. It wasn't just the lack of inscription that unsettled me. It was the way the grass around it grew thinner, as if the earth had been scorched long ago and never recovered. I reached out and brushed the surface with my hand. The stone was warm. I pulled my hand back as soon as I felt the warmth. It wasn't just warm from the sun. It felt alive somehow, like something beneath the surface was breathing heat upward through the stone. I stepped back uneasy and looked around. The fog had thickened again, swallowing the lower half of the cemetery until I could barely see the path I came in on. That was when I saw her. A child standing just beyond the edge of the clearing, half hidden behind one of the older stones. She was barefoot in a simple white dress, her hair dark and hanging wet against her cheeks. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at me with eyes too large and too still. I blinked and she was gone. No sound, no footsteps, just gone. I turned quickly, scanning the trees and the graves, but there was nothing. No movement, no rustling leaves. I told myself it was just the fog playing tricks, or maybe my own nerves after the long drive. But when I looked back at the nameless stone, something had changed. A single object lay at its base, a small wooden toy carved in the shape of a boat. I hadn't seen it before, and I was sure it hadn't been there. I bent down to look closer and noticed a name faintly scratched into the side. My own. I stared at the toy boat for a long time, not touching it, not daring to move. The carving was rough, but the letters of my name were unmistakable. Not just my first name, but the middle initial too, something I almost never used. I finally stepped back, trying to make sense of it, but nothing added up. I had never been to this place. I had never told anyone where I was going, and yet something here already knew me. I looked around, hoping to find any sign that someone else had been here recently. A camper, a caretaker, anyone but the fog pressed close and silent. I decided to keep moving, following the edge of the clearing deeper into the cemetery, where the stones grew older, smaller, more broken. Some had sunken into the ground, almost completely leaving only thin edges of moss-covered granite visible above the soil. One stone caught my eye, not because of its shape, but because of what was in front of it. A photograph, black and white and badly faded, but still visible. It showed a boy maybe 10 years old standing beside the same nameless stone I had just touched. The boy was wearing a shirt I recognized from an old picture at my parents' house, one I had worn as a child. My skin prickled. I flipped the photo over. Nothing on the back, just a smear of dirt and a thumbprint. I didn't remember the photo being taken, but the face was mine. The clearing felt smaller suddenly, like the trees had crept inward when I wasn't watching. The stone now looked taller, as if it had risen just slightly from the earth. Or maybe I had shrunk. Either way, I was starting to feel like I was walking back into a memory I never made. I stood there gripping the photo tighter than I meant to the edges damp from my palm. I didn't want to be afraid. But something about seeing my younger self in this place made the world tilt just a little. The ground felt less solid beneath me, like I was stepping on something not meant to hold weight. I turned to leave to retrace my steps back through the graves, but the path was gone. The rows of stones had shifted. Where there had been gaps now, there were none. Where there had been an opening between trees, only a wall of fog remained. And then I heard the footsteps, soft, deliberate crunching gravel slowly behind me. I turned around, and she was there again. The girl, same white dress still wet and clinging. She stood next to the nameless stone, one hand now resting gently on top of it. Her eyes met mine, but they weren't angry or pleading. They were empty, like windows looking into a room where no one lived. Then she pointed, not at me, not at the trees, but at the ground directly beside my feet. I looked down and saw a shallow depression in the earth. No stone, no marker, just a dip in the soil where grass had never grown. My skin went cold. Slowly, I knelt and brushed the dirt aside. Just beneath the surface was another photo. This one in color. It showed me standing in the clearing holding the black and white picture, staring into the camera. Only I hadn't taken it. And in the background, standing at the edge of the trees, was the girl, smiling. I dropped the photo like it burned and staggered backward, heart thudding so hard, it felt like it might crack a rib. The girl was gone again. So was the path. Every direction I turned looked the same rows of nameless stones vanishing into fog that refused to lift. I ran anyway, not caring where my feet took me, just knowing I needed to be away from that stone, from her, from whatever this place had become. But no matter which way I moved, the terrain repeated like a loop, folding back on itself. I passed the same cracked angel statue 3 times, each time with a different piece missing. First a hand, then the face, then the wings. I tried calling out, but my voice died in the air, swallowed before it could echo. My phone was dead screen black, though I had charged it that morning. I sat down at one point, just sat and tried to breathe, tried to think. That was when I noticed it. A new stone. Where I had passed only dirt before, now stood a short, unmarked marker. Fresh dirt still clung to its base. I moved closer despite myself and saw faint scratches across the face of it, shallow and uneven, but legible. They spelled out my name. Full name, date of birth, but no date of death. That part was blank. Just a line waiting for me to stop running. I stood in front of the stone for what felt like hours, unable to move, unable to blink, barely able to breathe. The silence around me deepened, pressing against my ears, until even my heartbeat felt muffled, like I was already beneath the ground. I turned away, finally, legs shaking, and pushed through the fog again this time, not looking for the path, just searching for anything different. Eventually, the mist began to thin, and the outline of my car emerged in the distance, coated in dew and dust, but real. I climbed in, hands trembling, and locked the doors before starting the engine. It turned over without hesitation, as if it had never failed. I didn't look back. I drove until I saw houses again, and then people, then lights and the sea, and only when I reached a small motel near the edge of another town did I let myself stop. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the stone and the girl and the photos. Around 3 a.m, I opened my phone out of habit. The screen was on, no lock screen, just a photo open in the gallery. It showed the cemetery, fog rolling low. And in the center, I stood beside the stone, smiling. Behind me, the girl's face leaned into the frame, not quite touching the ground, and not quite floating. Her eyes were still empty. And in the corner of the image, carved clean into the stone beside us, was the date of my death. Tomorrow. Story 3. Crossroads never end. I was supposed to be passing through West Texas on my way to visit an old college friend in New Mexico. The plan was simple. One night in a motel, then back on the highway. But sometime around dusk, my GPS froze just a few miles outside a town called Arlen Ridge. I kept driving anyway, thinking the road would loop back toward the main highway eventually. That was when I saw the crossroads. No signs, no markers, just 2 narrow roads intersecting in the middle of dry, flat land that stretched out in every direction. In the center sat an old gas station, boarded up windows, rusted pumps long out of use. It looked abandoned, but someone had recently left a folding chair on the front porch, and next to it, a small wooden box wrapped in a cloth. I pulled over, planning to stretch my legs and maybe take a few photos. The air was still dry, but not hot the way I expected. It had that strange, hollow feel like right before a dust storm rolls in. I walked toward the crossroads without knowing why, drawn by the feeling that I had been here before. Not just in passing, in some other way deeper. Like the road wasn't leading me somewhere. It was leading me back. The gravel crunched under my boots as I stepped out of the car, the silence around me thick and unbroken. The gas station looked like it had been empty for decades, but the folding chair on the porch was clean. No dust, no rust. The cloth covering the wooden box fluttered slightly, even though the air was completely still. I climbed the 2 creaking steps to the porch, half expecting the door to swing open or someone to appear behind the broken window, but nothing moved. I knelt and gently lifted the edge of the cloth. Inside the box was a small jar, filled with ash sealed with wax. Next to it lay an old photograph, creased and faded. It showed 2 boys standing in front of the gas station, smiling, one of them holding the very same jar. I stared at the boy on the left. His face was younger, but familiar. It was me. I didn't remember taking the photo, and I had never seen that jar before. I looked around as if expecting someone to come out of the fogs and explain everything, but there was only the soft rustle of dry weeds. I stepped down from the porch and walked to the middle of the crossroads. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the land painted in dim rust and long shadows. I turned a slow circle, looking at all 4 directions. They all looked the same. Empty flat stretching into nowhere. I picked one road and started walking, thinking I could find my way out. 10 minutes later, I was back at the gas station. I stopped in the middle of the road, staring at the gas station in disbelief. I had walked straight the entire time, never turned, never doubled back, and yet here I was standing in the exact same place. The same rusted pumps, the same sagging porch, the same cloth still fluttering over the box. My footprints even matched up in the dust. I checked my phone, hoping to drop a pin or use the compass, but the screen stayed black no matter how many times I pressed the power button. I turned back, retraced my steps, and chose a different road this time, one that curved slightly to the east. I walked faster, eyes fixed on the horizon. But the same thing happened. Within minutes, the gas station came back into view as if the land itself had folded in a circle. Frustrated, I yelled into the empty air, the sound swallowed almost instantly. Then I saw it. A new item had been placed next to the box on the porch. A worn leather journal, its corners singed and brittle. I approached slowly, heart racing. The journal was open to a page near the middle, and written in a shaky hand was a sentence that made my mouth go dry. "You have to bury the ashes. You promised." My head spun. I had never made that promise. Not that I could remember. But a small part of me whispered that maybe I did. A long time ago, I picked up the journal, my fingers trembling as I flipped through the pages. Most of them were blank or torn, but scattered entries in that same uneven handwriting told a story I didn't remember living. It spoke of 2 boys growing up near Arlen Ridge, one who stayed and one who left. It mentioned the jar again, described it as holding more than just ash, something about a promise made in blood under a red sky. The writing became frantic toward the end, almost illegible, as if the person had been shaking or scared when they wrote. The final entry was a single line, written over and over until the ink had bled through the page. "You have to finish what you started." I closed the book and looked back at the jar, still nestled in the box, still sealed in wax. The cloth beneath it was marked with a faint red stain. I didn't want to touch it, but my hand moved on its own, wrapping around the cool glass. The moment I lifted it from the box, the wind picked up hard and sudden. Dust swirled in tight circles around my feet, and the air filled with the scent of scorched wood, and something older, like forgotten earth, turned open. Then from across the road, I heard a voice. Not loud, not clear. Just a whisper like breath pressed through cracked lips. You said you'd come back. I spun around, scanning the fields, but no one was there. Only the jar in my hand, warm now, almost pulsing like a heartbeat. The crossroads behind me were no longer empty. A figure stood at the far corner, barely visible in the growing dark, watching, waiting. I froze the jar, heavy in my hand, the figure at the edge of the crossroads, unmoving. It looked like a man, but the proportions were wrong. Arms too long, head tilted slightly to one side like it had been broken and never reset. The sky had darkened fast, and the clouds above twisted into unnatural shapes like bruises stretching across the heavens. I called out, but my voice felt distant, like it barely left my throat. The figure took a step forward, then another, moving with a strange rhythm like it wasn't sure how walking was supposed to work. I backed away, but my feet sunk into the dust, as if the ground itself didn't want me to leave. The jar pulsed again, and for a split second I felt something behind my eyes, a memory not mine, but familiar. Two boys standing here, one holding the jar, the other digging a shallow grave at the center of the crossroads. I blinked, and the figure was closer. I could see its face now, or rather what was left of it. It was my face. Not as it looked now, but younger, pale, and cracked as if left too long in the sun. The mouth opened and spoke with my voice, but older and hollow. You left me here. I shook my head, denying something I didn't understand. But the memories kept coming flooding back in waves. The pact, the blood, the promise to bury him if he ever died first. And then the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned slowly, and there was a second figure identical to the first standing on the opposite side of the road. The crossroads were no longer empty. They were full of every version of me that had broken that promise. I staggered back, the jar clutched tightly in both hands as the two figures moved in perfect sync, circling me from either side. The wind howled now, sharp with grit, and the air shimmered like heat rising off pavement, though the night had turned cold. I could feel something shifting beneath the ground, as if the very dirt of the crossroads remembered everything I had forgotten. My breathing turned shallow. The jar felt heavier, pulsing in rhythm with the memories that now crashed through me like waves against stone. I saw it clearly now. Years ago, we had made a pact at this very spot, me and the boy from the photo. My cousin Eli. We had buried something here. Not ashes, but a secret. A moment of panic that turned to silence, and then to time and distance. I had left. He had stayed. I whispered his name, and the figures froze. The one with my face tilted its head again and slowly raised a hand, pointing to the center of the crossroads. I didn't think. I just dropped to my knees and started digging with both hands, flinging up dust and stone until I hit something solid. Wood, a box, smaller than a coffin, but too large to be forgotten. I pulled it free and laid the jar beside it. The ground beneath me rumbled. The wind stopped, and when I looked up, both figures were gone. But I knew it wasn't over. The box was still sealed, and I hadn't opened it yet. I stared at the box lying in the dirt, its surface dry and splintered as if the desert had tried to swallow it and failed. My hands hovered above the lid, not quite touching it, afraid of what might be inside, or worse, what might not be. The jar pulsed once more, then stilled like it had given up waiting. I pressed my fingers under the edge of the lid and lifted. It creaked open with a sound like bone cracking under pressure. Inside were scraps of cloth and something wrapped in old leather cords and twine. I unwrapped it slowly and found a second jar, smaller and darker, sealed with wax, just like the one I had carried. A name was carved into the glass in rough, uneven letters. Eli. My chest tightened. I didn't remember making a second jar. I didn't remember carving anything. But my fingerprints were there in the dust along the rim. I replaced the jars in the box, rewrapped them carefully, then stood. The night was silent again, windless and still. I turned toward my car, thinking somehow the road would be clear now. But instead of the gas station, I saw the same crossroads stretching endlessly in every direction. No matter which way I turned, I stood at the center. And at the edge of the horizon, just barely visible, were more figures waiting, watching. Each one carried a jar, and all of them were mine. Story 4. The thing that moved the fence. When we bought the property, my wife and I thought the fence was charming. It was old, made of dark cedar that had turned gray with age, and it lined the edge of the woods behind the house like a forgotten boundary. The realtor told us it had been there since the original farmstead over 100 years ago, and no one had bothered to tear it down. It didn't mark anything important, just the edge of the lot, where the grass gave way to thick trees and underbrush. The first time I noticed it had moved, I thought it was my imagination. One morning, the posts seemed slightly off, just a foot or two closer to the back door. I chalked it up to poor memory. Maybe I had misjudged it, or the shadows were playing tricks in the morning light. But then, it happened again. A week later, the fence had clearly shifted. Not just one post, but the whole thing inched closer by another foot, perfectly aligned, as if lifted and placed with care. I measured it to be sure, and there was no doubt. It was moving. My wife laughed when I told her, said it was probably tree roots or the ground settling. But the dirt around the posts was undisturbed. No drag marks, no damage. Just a silent, creeping advance. That weekend, I decided to get a closer look. I waited until early morning when the fog still clung low to the grass and the woods behind the house were hushed. With a tape measure and camera in hand, I walked out toward the fence, careful to step where the grass looked untouched. The wood felt colder than I expected, even though the sun had already risen, and there was dew clinging to everything else. The fence was bone dry. I knelt beside one of the posts and brushed away the topsoil, looking for signs of movement or disturbance. But the dirt was packed tight. No cracks, no gaps, no evidence that anything had been dug up or dragged. I snapped a few photos, marked the measurements, and returned inside, planning to check again in a few days. That night, as we sat on the porch, my wife went quiet. Mid-sentence, her eyes fixed on the woods. I followed her gaze and saw nothing at first, but then she pointed. One of the fence posts, the farthest to the right, was gone. Just gone. No break in the line, no fallen wood. Simply missing. We walked out together, flashlights scanning the trees, and there it was. Upright deep in the woods, standing alone, as if it had been planted there. But there were no footprints, no tracks, just thick pine needles and silence. That was the night I stopped laughing. The next morning, I went out early before my wife woke up, determined to get to the bottom of it. I followed the trail where we had seen the lone post the night before, but when I reached the spot, it was gone. No post, no hole, no sign it had ever been there. The woods were undisturbed, like nothing had passed through at all. I walked back slowly, scanning every few feet, until I reached the fence line again. This time, 2 more posts were missing. The gaps were clean, as if the wood had never existed. No broken rails, no debris, just space. That night, I set up a motion-activated camera on the back porch, angled toward the woods, and left the porch light off. I didn't sleep much, kept checking the live feed on my laptop every hour. Around 3 in the morning, the screen flickered. For a moment, it went completely black and then came back blurry. In the frame, I saw something move at the edge of the trees. Not a person, not an animal, just the fence, shifting, not swaying or falling, but rising slightly from the ground, and sliding back an inch at a time like it was walking. The motion sensor never triggered. No alert, no noise. Just slow, deliberate movement, like something had reached underneath and lifted it without effort. When I reviewed the footage in the morning, that section was gone. Deleted or corrupted. Only static. And when I stepped outside, another post had disappeared. I couldn't take it anymore. That afternoon, I packed a thermos, a flashlight, and a notepad, and headed into the woods, determined to follow whatever path this thing was carving behind our house. I started at the place where the last post had vanished, using trees and rocks as markers as I went. The deeper I moved into the forest, the quieter everything became. Birds stopped calling. Wind stopped moving the branches. Even my footsteps seemed muffled, like the earth was listening. About 100 yards in, I found the missing posts. All of them. Arranged in a perfect circle about 20 feet wide, each one planted upright in the ground, spaced evenly like they were meant to be there. Inside the circle, the dirt looked different. Lighter in color, dry and cracked, like it had been scorched. I stepped into the ring, half expecting something to happen, but nothing did. At least, not at first. I walked to the center and crouched down, tracing my fingers over the brittle soil. Buried just beneath the surface was something hard. I dug with my hands and uncovered a piece of iron. It looked like the tip of a weather vane, or maybe an old tool head, but it was warped and blackened and warm to the touch. As soon as I lifted it, the air changed. A sharp, bitter smell filled my nose, and the woods around me felt suddenly wrong, like the trees were leaning in. I turned to leave, but the fence circle had changed. One post had moved while I wasn't looking, and where I had stepped into the ring, there was no gap anymore. Only fence, complete, encircling me entirely. I froze, unsure if I was imagining it, but no matter how many times I blinked, the truth stayed the same. The fence had closed. There were now no breaks in the circle, no obvious way out. The posts stood silently around me, tall and even, spaced like watchmen taking their positions. I tried stepping over one, but as soon as I lifted my foot, a sound rang out sharp and low, like a groan from beneath the ground. I stepped back. The air was thicker now, humid, like it was pressing against my skin. I looked down at the strange iron piece in my hand, and it pulsed once, like it had a heartbeat of its own. Then the ground beneath me trembled, not violently, but enough to make the loose dirt shift under my boots. I dropped to one knee and felt it again, like something massive stirred below. From the woods outside the circle, something moved fast between the trees, tall and narrow, too thin to be a person, but gliding like it floated just above the ground. I tried to call out, but no sound left my throat. Then a shape appeared at the edge of the circle just beyond the fence. It didn't try to come in. It didn't need to. Instead, it bent down and placed something gently between two posts. A single cedar plank, weathered, old, and on it, carved into the wood with deep, dark cuts, was my name. Not painted, not nailed on. Carved with something sharp and deliberate, as if it was adding me to the fence, as if I was the next post. I stared at the plank with my name carved into it, and felt a cold knot form deep in my chest. My name. Not just first and last, but middle too, written exactly how it appears on my birth certificate. No one should have known that. I dropped the iron object as if it burned me and stepped back toward the center of the circle. The air was pulsing now, almost humming, and the fence posts seemed taller, closer somehow. I turned in a slow circle, trying to find any sign of a gap, anything that would let me out. Nothing. Just the silent, watching woods, and that figure still standing at the edge. No face, no movement, just there. I pulled out my phone again, knowing it would not work, but desperate. Still dead. I shouted, but the sound hit the fence and folded back like it was being swallowed. Then I remembered the hole I had dug to find the iron piece. I dropped to my knees and began digging again, this time, deeper, frantically tearing at the cracked earth until my hands ached. A few inches down, I found roots gnarled and black like they had been burned. I ripped them away, and there beneath them was an old ring of stones. A fire pit, maybe, or something older. I didn't stop. I shoved the plank with my name into the pit and covered it quickly with dirt. The wind stopped. The hum vanished. When I looked up, the figure was gone, and one of the posts had fallen. A gap. A way out. Without thinking, I ran. I didn't stop running until I saw the edge of my backyard, again the porch light flickering faintly through the thinning trees. I burst out of the woods, breath-ragged hands bleeding, and fell to my knees in the grass. My wife rushed out, her face pale, as she helped me inside. I tried to explain everything: the fence, the circle, the iron piece, the figure. But the words tangled together in ways that didn't make sense. She said I had only been gone an hour, but to me, it had felt like an entire night. I didn't sleep. I sat at the window, staring out at the tree line, waiting for something to shift. For days, nothing happened. The fence stayed where it was. No posts moved, no planks vanished. Slowly, I convinced myself it had ended, that I had broken whatever it was, that maybe I had just lost track of time and scared myself into believing a story. But then one morning, I stepped outside to check the edge of the yard and froze. There on the ground, just beyond the grass line, lay a fresh plank. Cedar, weathered, no dirt, no moss. And carved into it were 5 names. Mine, my wife's, and the names of our 3 children. Below the last name, a space had been left, just enough room for one more. Story 5, Ridgewatch. When I first got the park ranger assignment at Ridgewatch, I thought it would be a peaceful break. After years working city patrols and disaster zones, I welcomed the idea of watching over a quiet stretch of mountain ridges and forest trails. The area was remote, untouched by modern sprawl, known for its stunning sunrises. My cabin sat alone near the edge of a steep drop overlooking the valley. Every morning, I checked the trail cams, reviewed the radio logs, and logged my notes. Most of the time, it was uneventful. Hikers came and went. Weather rolled in and out. But there was one spot marked on every old map that rangers were told not to approach. A plateau near the far edge of the ridge, marked only as Zone Delta. There were no paths leading to it, no signs, just a note in the handbook. Avoid entry. Do not set camp. Do not observe after dark. I asked my supervisor once why that zone was marked like that. He paused a long moment and then told me something I never forgot. You don't want to know what watches from there. You just make sure it does not see you first. At the time, I thought he was joking. I do not think that anymore. The first time I saw Zone Delta with my own eyes was by accident. I had followed a report of a lost hiker whose GPS signal had gone dark just past Ridge Trail 4. The area was steep and overgrown, but I managed to trace faint tracks in the mud leading up toward the plateau. By the time I reached the edge, the sun was low, and the light turned everything a deep golden red. The land flattened out suddenly, a perfect clearing framed by pink and jagged stone. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just silence so complete it rang in my ears. I stopped at the tree line, not crossing the invisible boundary I could feel between the forest in the open space. In the center of the clearing was a stone structure, waist-high circular, like an old well, but sealed with a metal grate bolted into concrete. Moss had grown along its edges, but the bolts were new, polished, untouched by weather. I called out for the hiker once, twice, 3 times. My voice sounded wrong, too loud against the stillness, like shouting inside a cave. No response. Just a flicker of movement from the far end of the clearing, something thin and pale slipping behind a tree before I could focus. I stood there frozen, unsure whether to take another step. The air was heavy, watching, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. I took 1 step closer to the clearing and instantly felt the air shift, colder without wind, and dense like walking into deep water. My boots crunched softly against the pine needles, but no echo followed. I approached the stone structure, slowly keeping my flashlight in hand, though daylight still lingered. The grate covering the center was thick iron and bolted tight. But what caught my attention were the scratch marks. Deep grooves etched into the concrete around the edge of the well, long and uneven, like something with claws had tried to pry it open from beneath. I crouched down for a closer look, and that was when I heard it. A voice. Not loud, not clear, but there. A faint whisper beneath the grate. It didn't say words. It just made sounds shaped like speech too soft to understand, but impossible to mistake for anything natural. I stumbled back, heart racing, and turned to leave. That was when I noticed the trees. They had shifted, just slightly, but enough. The clearing that had been a wide circle now seemed tighter, the trunks leaning inward, as if trying to keep me there. I ran, not waiting to see what followed, and didn't stop until I reached the base trail again, where birds sang and wind moved through leaves, like nothing had happened. But when I checked my GPS later, it showed no record of the plateau. Just blank space, like it had never existed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the cabin porch, staring out toward the ridge, wondering if I had imagined it. But the image of those claw marks and that whispering sound haunted me like a weight pressing on my chest. Against my better judgment, I decided to go back the next morning. Not out of curiosity, but because when I checked the ranger log from 3 years ago, I found an old entry that stopped my breath. A report from another ranger. Lost hiker. Same area, same plateau. Final note was 1 word written in large red ink before the page abruptly ended. Listening. I returned at sunrise, armed with a thermal scope, a recorder, and a printed map. When I reached the tree line again, I stayed just outside the clearing and scanned the area with the scope. Nothing at first. Then near the sealed well, the image flickered. A temperature reading appeared for just a second, like a heat source shifting beneath the ground. Then gone. I hit record and whispered the time and position into the mic. But the moment I spoke, everything changed. The air pressure dropped like a storm was rolling in. The trees swayed, though there was no wind. And then the recorder in my hand stopped working. Dead. No static, no error. Just off. I looked up and saw it. A shape. Not a person. Not an animal. Tall and thin, with no face, and arms too long, standing just at the edge of the clearing. Not moving, not blinking, just waiting. And I realized I had crossed the line without knowing it. I was already inside. I froze where I stood, heart thudding so loudly it felt like it might shake the trees. The figure didn't move. It stood there impossibly still at the far edge of the clearing, tall and skeletal, with limbs that bent just slightly wrong, like they had been built to mimic a person but hadn't gotten it quite right. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The forest behind me now seemed further away than it should have been. The trees that had lined the edge were gone or hidden, and in their place was open silence. Then the sound returned, that whispering, this time louder, closer. But it wasn't coming from the figure. It was rising from beneath the sealed grate at the center of the clearing. The air around the well shimmered like heat waves, and the bolts securing the grate began to rattle as if something beneath was pushing upward. The figure tilted its head toward the sound, but still did not move. Its attention had shifted. I took a single step back, and the thing's head snapped toward me. Not fast, not sudden, just directly. I could feel it seeing me, not with eyes, but with intention. Like it remembered me, like it had been waiting. I stumbled back and my boot caught a root. I fell hard onto my back, the sky spinning above. When I looked up, the figure was gone. So was the grate. The well now stood open. A black hole cut into the earth, and from it something was rising. Slowly, deliberately. Not in haste, because it didn't need to hurry. It already had me. I scrambled to my feet and ran without looking back, crashing through the trees in a blind panic. Branches scraped my arms and tore at my clothes, but I barely felt them. The woods had twisted around me, the trail gone, the landmarks unfamiliar. Behind me, I heard no footsteps, but something worse. That whisper again, now louder in my ears, as if it were inside my skull, threading through my thoughts. It spoke in no language I knew, but still I understood. It was asking, calling, inviting. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste blood, trying to drown it out with pain. Finally, I saw a break in the trees and burst into daylight, skidding down a slope onto the main access trail near the ranger post. Everything around me looked normal. Birds chirped. Wind rustled the pines. My truck sat parked exactly where I had left it, but I did not feel safe. I climbed inside, locked the doors, and sat shaking for what felt like an hour before starting the engine. I reported the lost hiker as missing, filed my notes, and said nothing about the well. The zone was marked closed due to unstable terrain. But I knew the truth. That night, as I lay in bed trying to block out the memories, I heard something tap on the cabin window. 3 slow knocks. When I looked, there was nothing there. But just beneath the glass, written in the condensation, was a word. Listening. The word on the glass faded with the morning light, but I couldn't shake the feeling it had left behind. I filed a request for transfer the next day, citing personal reasons. My supervisor barely glanced at the paperwork. He just nodded once and muttered, "You lasted longer than the last one." That was all he said. 2 weeks later, I was gone. I moved to a small town, states away, took a desk job and told myself I had imagined most of it. Stress, exhaustion, maybe some kind of hallucination. But some nights, I would still wake to silence, too perfect, too still. And I would remember that clearing the way, the grate rattled the thing that stood just outside what I thought was safe. Then last week, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. A recent shot taken from a trail cam I didn't recognize. It showed the clearing from a wide angle. In the center was the stone well, sealed again. But someone stood next to it. A ranger. Same uniform, same posture I had the first time I saw it. But the face wasn't mine. And scrawled in pen on the back of the photo was a message. One sentence in neat, careful handwriting. You never left. You're still listening. And now it's your turn to answer. Story 6. The Boy Who Never Faced Me. When I was 8 years old, I met a boy in the field behind my grandparents' house. It was the kind of field kids get lost in for entire summers, full of tall grass crickets, and a rusted-out swing set with one chain always squeaking in the breeze. I had been staying there for a week while my parents went through a divorce they didn't want me to hear. That afternoon, I saw him for the first time. He stood near the edge of the field facing away from me, wearing a red jacket that looked too clean, too bright for the dusty surroundings. I called out thinking he might be another kid visiting family, but he didn't respond. Just stood there unmoving. I tried again, louder. Nothing. When I got closer, I felt this strange urge not to touch him, like something would go wrong if I did. But I was 8. I didn't know fear the way adults do. I circled around wanting to see his face. That was the moment I learned what real dread was. No matter how I moved, no matter which angle I approached from his back was always to me. Like the world bent to keep his face hidden. I never saw his eyes. Not then. Not ever. The field stretched wide behind my grandparents' farmhouse, a sea of waving grass and sun-bleached toys forgotten by time. After I saw the boy for the first time, I asked my grandmother about him describing the red jacket, the stillness, the way he wouldn't speak. She paused mid-stir at the stove, then said gently, "There hasn't been another child near here in years, dear, maybe just your imagination." But I knew what I saw. So the next afternoon, I went back. This time I brought a juice box and my walkie-talkies, thinking, if I could get him to talk, maybe he would tell me who he was. When I reached the field, he was already there, standing in the exact same spot, back turned perfectly straight. The wind didn't move his jacket. His shoes left no marks in the dirt. I placed one walkie-talkie on the ground a few feet away and kept the other. I clicked the button and spoke softly, "Hello again. What's your name?" Nothing. Static. Then a sound like breathing. Just for a moment. But the boy didn't turn, didn't flinch, just stood like a statue in the grass. I circled again, slowly, cautiously, trying to catch a glimpse of his face. No matter what I did, I ended up behind him. Every time. As if the field itself was playing tricks on me. As if something deeper didn't want me to see. On the third day, I brought a Polaroid camera. I figured if I couldn't see his face with my eyes, maybe the camera would catch what I couldn't. I waited until the sun was at my back, and the boy had returned to his usual spot near the edge of the field, standing unnaturally still. I crept as close as I dared, heart-pounding, hands shaking slightly. From maybe 10 feet away, I lifted the camera and snapped a photo. The flash startled me in the silence. I pulled the print and waved it gently, waiting for the image to appear. When it did, I felt the blood drain from my face. The photo showed the field, the grass, the shadow cast by the sun, but no boy, not even an outline, like the space where he stood had been erased. I blinked hard and looked back up. He was still there. Same red jacket, same posture, completely untouched by time or light. I tried again, took 3 more photos from different angles. Each one came out the same. Empty. I called out this time louder, almost angry now. "Why won't you look at me? Why are you hiding?" That was when he moved, just slightly. His head tilted to the side, as if he had heard something for the first time. But still he never turned. That night I had my first dream of him. And in the dream, he was closer. Always just behind me. Always silent. I couldn't stay away. Every day after breakfast, I wandered back into the field, as if pulled by some invisible thread. My grandparents didn't question it. They were just happy I wasn't crying anymore. But I wasn't happy. I was obsessed. I stopped bringing toys or snacks. I started bringing questions. One afternoon, I brought a mirror. It was a small hand mirror from my grandmother's vanity. My plan was simple. I would approach the boy and try to catch his reflection. I made my way carefully through the grass and stopped just behind him, as always. The mirror trembled in my hand, but I slowly angled it over my shoulder so I could see his face. What I saw instead made my breath catch. In the mirror, there was no boy, only me, standing alone in an empty field. I turned sharply, expecting him to be gone, but he was still there, unmoving, solid, present. Yet in every reflection, every photo, every recording, he never appeared. That night, I dreamt again. This time I was in the field, but it was darker, and he was walking toward me. Slowly, no sound, no change in expression. Just that red jacket moving through the tall grass. I tried to scream, but couldn't. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. When I woke, my bed sheets were damp with morning dew, and my socks were muddy. I had no memory of sleepwalking. The grandparents never heard me leave. But I knew the truth. I had been back in the field. And this time, the boy had followed me home. The next morning, I woke to find the mirror I had used resting on my nightstand facing me. I was sure I'd returned it to my grandmother's room. But there it was, as if someone had placed it deliberately. I stared at my reflection for a long time, afraid to move, afraid to blink. Part of me thought I'd see his face there behind mine, just waiting. That afternoon, I went back to the field with one goal. I would speak to him directly up close and not run this time, no matter what happened. He was already there, standing in his usual spot, unmoved by wind or time. I walked slowly through the grass, heart pounding with every step, until I stood just feet behind him. I didn't circle. I didn't try to trick the angle. I simply spoke. "Please," I said, my voice barely steady, "why do you come here? Who are you?" Still, he didn't answer. Then I said the one thing that changed everything. "What do you want from me?" At that moment, he twitched, not a full step, just a shift, as if acknowledging me for the first time. Then he lifted one arm slowly and pointed not at me, but to the woods beyond the field. His hand held steady, and for the first time, I realized the truth. He wasn't here for me. He was warning me. The boy was never facing me because something else was. Something behind me. I turned. The field was empty, but the trees at the edge had moved. Not swaying, not in the wind. Moved, shifted closer, bent forward like something in them had been watching all along. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat locked up as I stared at the edge of the woods, where the trees loomed unnatural and wrong, and their shapes twisted just enough to make the whole scene tilt in my mind, like a picture hung at the wrong angle. I stepped back toward the boy, but he was already gone, vanished without sound or trace. Only the flattened grass where he had stood remained. I turned and ran, cutting through the field and bursting into the backyard of the farmhouse. My grandparents were on the porch waving as if nothing was wrong, as if I hadn't just come face to face with something that bent the world around it. That night, I locked my bedroom door and pushed the dresser in front of it. I slept with the mirror turned to the wall and the curtains shut tight. But at some point in the dark, I heard footsteps just outside my room, slow and steady, crossing the old wooden floorboards. They stopped at my door. Then I heard it, breathing, deep, steady, like someone standing just inches away. I never opened the door, not that night, not the next. I begged my parents to take me home early. They did without asking questions. I didn't return for years. But even now, as an adult, every so often I see a flash of red in the corner of my vision, or hear that soft crunch of footsteps behind me. And I know he's still there, still watching, still warning me. Years passed. I grew up, moved to a city, started a job, built a life like anyone else. But I never stopped thinking about the boy. and the red jacket, the one who never faced me. Sometimes I convinced myself he was a dream, a child's imagination, fueled by stress and silence. But then, 3 weeks ago, I received a call. My grandfather had passed, and the farmhouse was now mine. I hadn't been back in over 2 decades. But something in me said I needed to return, needed to see the field one last time. When I arrived, the place looked smaller than I remembered. The swing set was gone, but the tall grass still danced in the breeze. I stepped into the field and felt it instantly. The hush, the weight, the eyes. And there he was, just as I remembered. Same red jacket, same stillness, same impossible angle. I didn't move, didn't speak. I just watched. And then slowly, his head began to turn. For the first time. Not fast, not violent, just steady. My heart seized. I should have run, but I couldn't. I needed to know. When his face came into view, it wasn't his. It was mine. My own face staring back at me, but older, tired, and hollow. And just before the vision dissolved, he whispered 2 words in my voice. Not warning. Invitation. Come home. Story 7. The Cross Ritual. I first heard about the Cross Ritual from my cousin Micah, who worked maintenance at an old decommissioned church deep in the hills of West Virginia. The place had been abandoned since the 70s, long stripped of pews and glass, but the stone structure remained upright, like a skeleton too stubborn to collapse. Micah called me one night, clearly shaken. He said he had found something carved into the stone floor of the basement. Not graffiti, not damage. Something older. A large cross made from symbols none of us recognized, burned into the stone like it had never been etched, but had always been there. He laughed nervously, said it gave him chills, but he would text me a picture. The photo never came. I didn't hear from Micah again after that call. When I tried calling back, his number was disconnected. His family said he had quit and disappeared the next day. No note, no sign of him. Just gone. I couldn't shake the feeling something was wrong. So I drove out there myself, found the church just as he described. It stood quiet, surrounded by trees that grew too close and cast shadows that never seemed to move. I didn't believe in curses or rituals. Not then. But I stepped inside that church, and I saw the cross, and everything changed. The church sat at the end of a narrow dirt road, almost hidden by the trees that leaned in from both sides, like they were trying to conceal it. I parked my truck and stepped out into the silence that seemed to hum with a strange weight. The front doors were still attached, though warped and weathered. They creaked open with a groan that echoed through the empty nave. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust, and the scent of rot and something faintly metallic like dried blood. Light filtered in weakly through cracks in the stone walls, casting long, pale shadows across the broken floorboards. The altar was long gone, but the shape of where it once stood remained burned into the stone like a scar. I moved carefully through the main hall, searching for a way to the basement Micah had mentioned. I found it behind a sagging door near the back. The staircase was steep and narrow, and as I descended, each step groaned under my weight, threatening to give way. At the bottom, the temperature dropped sharply. My breath came in visible puffs, even though it was summer outside. And there, in the center of the basement, was the cross. It was massive, covering nearly the entire stone floor, carved in looping symbols that pulsed faintly as if lit from beneath. I felt drawn to it and repelled at the same time. Like it knew I had come, like it had been waiting. I stood at the edge of the massive cross, unsure whether to take another step. The markings weren't just symbols. They were patterns that shifted ever so slightly when I looked at them too long, like they were alive or remembering something. I reached for my phone to take a picture, but the screen flickered and went black. Dead. Fully charged when I arrived, now completely unresponsive. I knelt down to examine the carvings more closely, and that's when I heard it. A soft dragging sound behind me, like something being pulled across stone. I spun around, but the basement was empty. Just dust cobwebs and silence. I told myself it was my imagination, the wind, a mouse, anything normal. But then I noticed the footprints in the thin layer of dust near the stairs. Bare feet, small, leading from the corner of the room directly to the center of the cross. And there they stopped. No return path, no prints leading away. Just an end. I felt a sudden pressure in my ears, like descending too fast in an airplane. And the lights above flickered, once then buzzed out completely, leaving me in thick darkness. In that moment, I felt the heavy presence of something just outside my vision, breathing slow and steady. I whispered Micah's name into the dark, and something answered. Not in words, just a sound like wet breath against stone. It wasn't human, but it knew my name. I reached blindly for my flashlight and clicked it on with shaking hands. The beam cut through the darkness, but felt weaker than it should have, like the shadows were swallowing the light before it could stretch. The footprints were still there, unmoved, but now I noticed something else. On the far wall where the dust had once coated everything evenly, there was a message smeared in long strokes, like a finger had dragged through the grime. 3 words: walk the cross. My throat dried instantly. I didn't want to. Every part of me screamed to leave. But something beneath that message pulled at me with cold insistence, like a string wrapped around my spine. I stepped to the edge of the cross and placed one foot on the stone pattern. It felt warm, too warm, like skin left in the sun. I moved carefully, following the path of the symbols. As I walked, the symbols began to glow, faintly pulsing with a heartbeat rhythm. At the halfway point, my flashlight died, completely plunging me into a red-tinged haze from the markings alone. I heard whispers, now clear, but not in any language I understood. They came from the corners of the room, the ceiling, the floor, from inside me. My legs moved as if not mine, walking the pattern step by step until I reached the center. There, a circle waited slightly deeper than the rest. I stepped into it. The glow stopped. Silence. Then a low crack beneath my feet as the stone circle began to lower like an ancient elevator. My last thought before total darkness swallowed me was that Micah had stood here too. And maybe he was still below, waiting for someone to finish what he started. The stone platform descended slowly at first, then faster, as if gravity no longer followed rules I understood. The air grew thick and damp, the scent of earth and rust overwhelming. I tried to scream, but the sound died in my throat. Finally, the platform stopped with a dull thud, and I found myself in a chamber carved from solid rock walls, covered in more of those twisting symbols. But these moved pulsing faintly with a dim red glow, like veins beneath skin. In the center of the chamber stood a figure. Not Micah, not human. It was tall, gaunt, its face hidden beneath a cloth, soaked in something dark. Its arms were too long, and it held something in both hands. A cross, but not like any I had ever seen. It was made of bone and wrapped in sinew and hair. When I stepped off the platform, it turned toward me, slowly, silently. I asked, "Where is Micah?" My voice echoed through the chamber. The figure didn't answer, but raised the cross in its hand and pointed to the wall behind it. It turned. Etched into the stone was Micah's name, over and over, in blood, layered until the letters blurred together into a smear of pain. Then I heard his voice, faint, broken, coming from the walls themselves. "Help me, please." He was here, trapped. The figure stepped forward, extending the bone cross toward me, as if offering it. I didn't want to touch it. Every instinct screamed not to. But I did, and the chamber shook. The floor split beneath me, and I fell again this time, into something deeper, something older. And as I fell, I knew. The ritual had only just begun. I fell into darkness that didn't feel like absence, but like presence, like being swallowed by something that could think. The bone cross burned in my hands, pulsing with a rhythm that wasn't mine. I expected to hit the bottom, but instead, I landed softly as if the air itself had thickened into a cushion. Around me was a different chamber. This one circular and smoothed the walls, black and wet, with symbols that dripped like ink. In the center stood an altar made of stone, and behind it was Micah, or something that looked like him. His eyes were vacant, his mouth twitching like he wanted to scream, but couldn't. I called his name, and he flinched, but didn't speak. I stepped closer, and that's when the voice returned. Not from him, but from inside my head. "You have walked the cross. You have accepted the burden. Release him. Take his place." The altar began to glow. I understood then the cross was not a path. It was a contract. One enters, one stays, one escapes. I looked at Micah, who now stared at me, tears cutting clean lines down his dirt-caked cheeks. I placed the cross on the altar. The chamber trembled. Micah collapsed, and the floor beneath him began to rise, taking him back up. I stayed behind. The darkness folded in around me like a closing hand. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Because now I understood. The ritual needed a watcher, and it was my turn to keep the cross waiting. Time stopped meaning anything. I don't know how long I was down there. Hours, days, years. The chamber didn't change, but something in me did. I didn't feel hunger or thirst. I just waited and listened. The whispers that once came from the walls now came from me, echoing out in soft waves, like prayers in a forgotten language. Then one day I heard footsteps. Real ones. Soft, careful, descending the same stone circle I had ridden down what felt like lifetimes ago. Light flickered above, and a figure appeared. A young man, flashlight trembling in his hands, eyes wide with fear. He looked just like I had when I arrived, and I smiled, not with joy, but with understanding. The boy froze as I stepped forward. I offered him the bone cross. He shook his head, backing away, whispering a name. Micah. The chamber responded. The symbols lit up. The walls pulsed. And I realized Micah never escaped. The ritual didn't release him. It just made him into something else. Something like me. I tried to warn the boy, but my voice came out wrong. Too deep, too slow, no longer mine. He ran, but there's nowhere to go. The ritual doesn't end. It only changes hands. And now someone else walks the cross, just like I did. Just like you will. When you hear the call. When the cross remembers your name. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.